more specifically, in this conversation, it's not just a matter of what can churches learn from new churches, but what can established churches learn about new churches. So for those of you who are part of an established church, I want to say, here's some things we learned. For those of you who are part of a church planting system, I want to remind you and urge you to make sure you maintain bridges to those who sent you, to those who can learn from your mistakes. That's a valuable thing that we are offering to the kingdom. This is about the kingdom of Christ, and our intention is to do all this together so that we're learning along the way. So I'm not sure if we're a new church anymore, but the truth is God has revealed some things along the way, some that we planned and hoped for, some that we never would have expected or intended along the way. And our story, Brenda's and my story, has been a remarkable flavoring agent to that story, so that's where we'd like to begin. Brenda?
Yeah, so taking a major turn from the video.
Major.
So, as the gospel story is being revealed, God is telling his story, not just through each of us, but through each of our churches. So we have to begin with with our story, also, which becomes the Renovatus story, so that you have a context for what we have been learning, and perhaps that will be something for you to gain some learning from renovation. Well. And that is not a good idea to name your church because that has been our experience. And we were kind of thinking we would allow God to help us renovate other people. But what has happened is that God is renovating us from the depths. And so that is the story that we'll begin with. So as we began, our pre-launch year is 2004, and some of our teammates we were privileged to plant with Stan and Gina, and with our son and daughter-in-law Ryan and Jessica Woods, among others. And but in our first month of our pre-launch year, my mom mysteriously was killed, and we hadn't even finished fundraising. I mean, it was just, it was quite a beginning to wrestle with that reality. And so then we launched, and as I said, we had a sweet, blessed team to plant with. And so Ryan and Jessica and our granddaughter and grandson, Jones and India, were part of our launch team. And actually, Ryan and Jessica were our embedded church planters that would plant on the opposite side of town, downtown Vancouver, in a few years. It ended up being several years later than we planned, but none of this is what we planned. So, in January of 2011, we sent out Ryan and Jessica and our worship leader, Matt, to plant on the opposite side of town in downtown Vancouver, more of an urban ministry, driving school bus in an effort to supplement our income and also to live more deeply in our community. And so just a couple months after that, Ryan was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Ryan died November 7th, 2012. In his home with all of his family surrounding him. And renovation hits hard ground. And so now we want to tell you what we've learned. It's a little soon, I think. But But definitely through 8.5 years, God has been teaching us much. And the renovation continues, very much so. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And number two, and this is that we are not the healthy coming to help the sick and the wounded, that we are all wounded. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we come alongside one another to be present with one another. There's some beautiful books that have helped me along the way. One of them, Richard Rohr, and he says, we're always pretending we're not a part of the great, unwashed, imperfect crowd. We do this giant camouflage job largely to ourselves. If only we could see our wounds as the way through, as Jesus did, then they would become sacred wounds. I wanted to mention was our wounds are our way through. Mm-hmm. In our own pain and as we walk through with others through their pain. I want to encourage us not to be afraid of people's sorrow, of people's tears, of their anger, even their anger towards God. God's big enough to handle anything that we have, and He knows what's going on inside anyway. So to camouflage it for others and for ourselves doesn't really serve any purpose. But to encourage you to have courage in walking with people and allowing them to have the emotions that are going to be present. To encourage you to remember that people want to be seen and heard and understood. This is Richard Rohr's book, Job and the Mystery of Suffering. I didn't mention the title there. He says, that's what Job is asking, almost demanding. Someone try to understand me. When we are understood, we feel another person really cares. It's surprising how the problem, for the most part, can fade. We don't need the answer anymore. The mere fact that someone is carrying the burden with us, walking with us on the journey, for some unbelievable reason, it's not logical at all, takes care of much of the problem. That's the primary character of a true counselor. And the fifth thing is to choose to be present. It's so hard to be present, and I think most of us rarely can be fully present. But in the few times I've experienced it, it's a beautiful thing. Richard Rohr he says that that's when we're present in body, soul, and spirit, that's prayer. And I think I've experienced that when we can be present with another. Platitudes and cliches. And although they're usually the truth, Ryan is in heaven, I will see him someday. But right at this moment, they minimize the pain of the person we're talking to. And we don't mean for that to be so, because they are true things, but they do minimize the pain of the person, because I wish that seeing Ryan in heaven someday gave me comfort, but right now it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And I wish that it did. And I know it will someday, but just trying to be present and acknowledge the pain of the person you're with, whether they've lost their job, whether they've just gone through a divorce, whether they've working through abuse, whether they've had a loss.